My father gave my spoiled older brother $120,000 for medical school, but refused to help me start my business. And now they're calling me begging for money because they claim my brother's life is in danger. So before I tell you what I did, I need to give you some context about my family, so everything makes sense. I'm 21 now, and my parents divorced when I was in high school. But the truth is their marriage was broken long before that, because even as a kid, I could feel the constant tension in the house. The kind where the parents stay together, but there's no warmth, no love, and you grow up watching other families and realizing, little by little, that whatever you have at home isn't what happy looks like. I also have an older brother named Eric, and you might think a difficult childhood would make siblings closer, but for us it did the opposite, because my brother has been cruel to me for as long as I can remember, and for some reason, he always held a grudge against me. So he took every chance to humiliate me, especially when it was convenient for him, and that eventually forced my parents to choose sides without openly admitting they were doing it. My mother was mostly on my side, but my father always supported Eric, and Eric used that like a weapon because he was bigger than me, stronger than me, and he never missed an opportunity to come at me, sometimes alone and sometimes with his friends, and the only thing I could do was run to my mom, which only made me look weaker in their eyes, like I was some mommy's boy who couldn't handle anything. My mother would scold him, but it never changed anything, because my father always stepped in to defend him and tell my mother I needed to toughen up and learn to be a man, as if getting bullied and beaten was some kind of lesson, and I didn't want any of that. I just wanted peace. I wanted a calm life, but my father and my brother seemed to hate the idea of me being calm, like my comfort offended them, so they kept trying to ruin it. My mom tried to protect me, but she couldn't watch us every second because she was a housewife and had everything on her shoulders, raising us, keeping the house together, handling daily responsibilities, so she physically couldn't prevent every situation. And over time, I learned to accept things, to swallow it, to stop fighting every battle, because fighting didn't make me safer, it just made everything louder. Then one day, around 8th grade, my mother sat me down and told me she and my father were breaking up, and I was old enough to understand there were reasons, and that maybe it was for the best, but she didn't tell me the exact reason at the time, so I assumed what I already felt, that my father was a terrible person to live with, and my mother had finally reached her limit. Much later, in high school, I found out the real reason, because my mother discovered messages between my father and his secretary on his phone, and that was the final straw after years of suffering, because she couldn't forgive betrayal on top of everything else. We talked honestly that day, and my mother told me something that hit even harder. She said my father never loved me because he never wanted a second child at all, and the only reason I even exist is because my mother refused to give me up and threatened divorce if he tried to force her into an abortion. Back then, my father was starting his business, money was tight, bills were hard, and one child already felt like a burden to him, and another child felt unbearable. But my mother insisted, and she told me they had a nanny at the time because she worked until she gave birth, and she even offered to keep working and borrow money from my grandfather until my father's business stabilized. But my father refused to take money from my grandfather, so he agreed to a second child only if my mother quit her job and stayed at home, hoping she would refuse the deal and end the pregnancy, but she didn't, and from that moment their relationship started to collapse. My mother admitted they could have handled things better, but the way my father started to hate me and take it out on me after I was born made her feel sick, and she never truly tried to repair the relationship after that. And she even apologized to me, saying it was partly her fault my childhood was so painful because she stayed too long, believing divorce would hurt us more, but staying only made everything worse, and she still left in the end, just after we had all taken the worst kind of damage. The sad part is that a part of her still loved him, even after everything, and she hoped he would change, but he didn't. He disappointed her again and again. The distance grew, and eventually he cheated. I love my mother more than anything, but sometimes I wish she had told me the truth earlier, because she only explained all of this when I was already in high school, even though the divorce happened during that time, and the custody arrangement meant I had to spend every weekend with my father. The agreement was that I stayed weekends with him, while my brother stayed with my mother, and honestly it was easier that way, because I hated being around my father, and I hated being around my brother even more, and I made it clear I didn't want to be with my father at the same time as Eric, because that would have been a nightmare. My mother agreed. The lawyers wrote it that I still had to spend some time with my father, and most of the time my brother and I grew up with her, but we still had to spend holidays together. And it was always terrible, because after the divorce my father started seeing his secretary openly, and my mother couldn't stand it. Although she was smart enough not to bring her to family holidays, the truth still sat in the air, and the atmosphere was always tense. We pretended we were a family because my father wanted that image, and my mother had to agree because she had already created distance and didn't want to escalate things further. So we acted like there were family ties, but only on the surface, because deep down none of us really loved each other, and my brother and I had chosen different parents, and the parents did the same, and looking back, it was completely dysfunctional. Even after I learned the truth, I kept contact with my father because my mother told me I needed to, since she believed he would pay for my education, and that was the reason she hadn't told me earlier. She was afraid I would cut him off and lose the only chance I had to afford college, because after the divorce, she only started working again and didn't have savings to pay for the college I wanted. My father was my only option, so I forced myself to stay in touch, even though it was painful, but it turned out to be pointless anyway, because not only did my father keep humiliating me, I eventually found out there was no money for me at all. A couple months before graduating, my friends and I decided to take a huge risk and start our own business instead of going to college. And we were only 18. We had no experience, no education, and no safety net. But we were passionate, and we didn't believe college would actually speed up our path to success. So we took the leap. The idea was mine, and at first it started as a joke. But then we realized we really wanted it, and we chose clothing and accessories because we wanted to change the market a little, since most stores in our area either sold mass-produced corporate stuff or were small shops that didn't understand how teenagers actually wanted to dress, and my friends and I constantly felt like we had nothing to wear that matched who we were. So it was either secondhand clothes or dressing like our dads, and we knew so many people our age felt the same, so we built a brand around that. We planned for months, wrote a business plan, split responsibilities, some focused on design because we could draw and loved fashion, others focused on business, and I had to find investors, which was almost impossible, because who was going to invest in a group of teenagers with no degree and no track record? So at first, every investor rejected us without even meeting, and I quickly realized the only people who might even consider helping were family and friends. My friends talked to their parents, and after enough conversations and persuasion, most of them got support, and then it was my turn to talk to my father, the hardest option, and I knew it. First, I had to tell him I wasn't submitting college applications because we were building our brand, and I wanted to use what I assumed was my college fund to launch the business. And when I told him I wasn't going to college, he didn't even care. He said it didn't matter what I did, but when I mentioned the fund, he looked at me like I was delusional and said there was no fund because he never saved money for me at all. That was the moment I learned the truth. He had already spent everything on Eric, who went to medical school 4 years before me. And I knew med school was expensive, but I assumed my father's business was doing well and he could support both of us. But what I didn't know was that Eric didn't just get money for tuition, he got huge amounts for a comfortable life, even though he was supposed to be studying to become a doctor, and my father gave it to him willingly. He told me that when Eric left for medical school, he wrote him a check for almost $120,000 and basically handed him all the money he had saved, and after that he lived only on his salary. And it didn't bother him at all, because in his mind Eric was the smart son worth investing in, and I was the stupid one who wouldn't even try for college. And according to him, I proved it by choosing business instead of school. At first I thought he was exaggerating, but after a minute I realized he was completely serious, and something in me snapped, because I was angry not only because he left me nothing, but because he said it like it was natural, like my future didn't matter, like my whole life was just proof that he was right to treat me the way he did. That day was the first time I told him exactly what I thought about him, because I couldn't take it anymore, and I wasn't even asking for charity. I was going to repay the money when the business started making profit, but he refused even the smallest help, and the fight was so ugly that it became the last day we ever spoke. I decided I would never see him again, and he seemed perfectly fine with that, and when I told my friends my father wouldn't invest, they understood, and my mother was the only one who helped me. She gave what she could, and my grandparents gave the rest, even though I wanted to avoid taking money from them because they were older and needed savings for medical needs and emergencies. But they believed in me anyway, invested in us, mentored us, and over time our brand actually grew into something real. We became popular with teenagers. We worked harder than I can explain, and the business started bringing in strong profit, to the point where I honestly believe we're more successful than my father ever expected, maybe even more successful than his own business. And then, 2 weeks ago, something happened that made my stomach drop. My father called me for the first time in almost 3 years, and he started with congratulations about my business. And for a split second I thought maybe he was going to admit he was wrong. Maybe he was going to apologize, but instead he said they needed my help. He said Eric had finished his residency, but he was in serious trouble because while living on his own he started gambling, and my father recently found out he had debts, not small ones, but amounts big enough that people were looking for him. And according to my father, the people Eric owed were dangerous, and Eric had returned home days after his residency ended and was basically hiding. My father said it wasn't going to last, that Eric would be found sooner or later, and he was afraid Eric's life was in real danger. And then, like it was the most normal thing in the world, he asked me for money to pay off the debts so they could start over. He said he lived only on his salary and couldn't handle it, but my business made good money, and for me, he said, that amount shouldn't be a big deal. And what made me furious wasn't even the request, it was the fact that he didn't apologize for anything. He didn't acknowledge the past. He acted like we had always been close, like he was doing me a favor just by calling. And he expected me to help simply because he decided to reach out. I got so angry I told him to knock on other doors, because he was an idiot if he thought he was getting even $1 from me. And then I hung up and blocked his number. After that I got calls from an unknown number, and I realized it was probably my brother, so I blocked that too. And for the next 2 weeks the guilt wouldn't leave me, because I do have money, and there's a part of me that keeps thinking I could fix everything. And I don't know if that makes me responsible or just stupid, because I don't know if they deserve anything from me after what they did. Part of me wonders if I'm the villain for refusing to help my brother even if he's in danger. But another part of me remembers that my father refused to invest in my future because he already spent all his savings on Eric, and he never cared about me at all, and I'm still trying to figure out what the right move is. Before I continue, I want to ask you what you think, because honestly I feel like the answer is obvious. I don't owe my father anything, and if he never helped me, never supported me, never gave me anything, then why should I rescue my brother now, especially when that brother spent my whole life trying to destroy me? After reading people's responses and sitting with it for a couple days, I decided not to let emotions control me, and I finally told my mother what happened, even though I didn't want to burden her, and she told me something that shocked me with how calm she was. She said I had no reason to help them, because they never cared about me, and everything would be different if my father and Eric had at least apologized for the way they treated me. But they didn't even do the minimum, and if Eric dug his own pit, then he can lie in it. She said she might worry if he were younger, but he's an adult and he knows exactly what he's doing, and my father spoiled him his whole life, encouraged his worst traits, and this is the result. So now they can clean up their own mess. Her advice felt harsh, but it also felt true, and I told myself these are my money, earned through hard work, and I don't want to hand it to a gambler, especially when I don't even know if my father was telling the truth or if it was another lie designed to pull money out of me. And honestly, after everything, I wouldn't even be surprised if it was a setup, because my success is probably painful for them to accept, and I know they would love to ruin my life if they could. So I decided to check the facts, because guilt makes you reckless, and I needed to know what was real. And the next day, I drove to my father's house, only to find out he had sold it weeks earlier, and a new family already lived there. I talked to the neighbors and learned the house had been on the market for almost a month, and apparently it sold for a lot because the area was expensive, which meant that by the time my father called me, he already had money, and that made my skin crawl, because if he already had money, why would he be begging me? I couldn't make sense of it until the next morning when my father's lawyer called and told me I had been removed from the will, because, according to my father, I failed a test he arranged for me. And yes, you read that right. There had never been any real danger, no real emergency. My father simply wanted to see whether I would give him money, and based on that, he decided whether I deserved to be in his will. The house was sold because he planned to move closer to Eric after residency and close everything down before leaving. And he thought it was perfectly acceptable to test me like I was a dog, as if my entire life wasn't proof enough of how little he cared. I was so disgusted I almost laughed. Because in that moment, I realized failing his test was the best thing that could have happened to me. Because I don't need his money, I don't need his inheritance, and I don't need his approval. And I wasted 2 weeks feeling guilty over a lie designed to manipulate me. I told myself that if he disappeared tomorrow, I wouldn't care, and the scariest part is that I believe it, because I spent years hoping for something from him, and all he ever gave me was proof that he never changed. The only truly sad part is this: if something real ever happens to them one day, I probably won't even believe it, and that will be their fault, not mine. And as if they needed one last joke to prove who they are, after they heard about my engagement, they actually sent me a letter saying they wouldn't attend the wedding because it would be inappropriate to attend an event hosted by someone who doesn't love and respect them. And when my mother, my fiancé, and my friends read it, they laughed until they cried, because the audacity was unbelievable, since none of us ever planned to invite them in the first place. But I'll give them this: they haven't changed at all, and at least they still managed to entertain us from a distance. Thanks for listening to the story, and if you want more like this, check out the previous videos on the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.